read the goddamn news lately, the headlines? Oh my God. Nobody wants EVs anymore. Dealers can't sell them. They're lined up, hundreds of them in the inventory. The automakers are saying there's no demand, we're delaying, right? It's the end of the EV era, folks. I'm here to tell you, breaking the news today, for all of you, this is it. It's over. EVs are dead. Rest in peace. You know, we all in this room, we gave it a great shot. We gave it the old college try, but I say we just pack it up, head to the bar now, pound down a nice Texas IPA and say we gave it our best shot and move on, right? No! It's not true. The headlines are not true. The sky is not falling. Actually, EV sales remain strong. And so let's dive into the data. So I don't know about you, but up and to the right a little bit, right? EV sales have obviously come a long way since, 10, 12 years ago. But even in the last couple of years, right? We had those couple of flat years, 2018, 2019, and 20. But since then, EV sales have been growing significantly. Through Q3, right, we've continued to see 50% year-over-year sales. This is my forecast, I might be a little optimistic on Q4. We're going to wait to see what happens, right, because interest rates, things like that. But right now, the story that's out there, the narrative out there that EV sales aren't growing is complete BS, right? We're seeing strong sales. And not to pick on a couple of automakers, one we're going to hear from a little bit later, but even Ford and GM are seeing strong growth, right? So I took their combined sales for each of the last 5 quarters, and you can see Q3 2023 BEV sales over Q3 2022, up a combined 23%, right? I don't know about you, but that's still pretty solid, particularly in the current interest rate and market environment and the increased competitiveness. Maybe that's not the 50% or 100% a lot of people want, but the idea that we're not seeing growth and demand is just not true. The data doesn't support that. And if you look at the number of models, so one of the things I did is I looked at 43 BEV models that were available in both Q1 of this year and Q3, because I wanted to remove the new models that went away and things like that. Of those 43 models, 72%, or 31 of them had sales increases, right? And only 12 of them had sales declines. And if you look at that 19,000 number, most of that came from 2 models, the Tesla Model Y and the Chevrolet Bolt. Not because there wasn't demand for those 2 models, is because in Q1 and Q2, they had their biggest sales quarters ever. They freaking crushed it. So the idea that they declined is actually also kind of a false narrative because they're comparing against their literally best quarters ever. Again, sales are still strong and growing. But of course, one of the things, and always one of my favorite charts to convey to audiences, is when we talk about EVs actually around the world, but also particularly in the US, it's fundamentally still a local market-driven phenomenon, right? And in the US, it's still on the coast. The majority of the EVs, we all know this, are purchased in the US are still primarily in the coastal states. There's a few exceptions, Colorado, Utah, a few others in sort of the middle part of the country are doing well. But fundamentally, we have this chasm, right? We have California, Oregon, and Washington that are already basically crossing the chasm into mainstream. And then we have states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Alabama, Mississippi and stuff that they basically, like EVs are not even on their radar, right? And then you have sort of everything in between. So fundamentally, we also have to understand and look at when we're talking about sales growth, really where is it happening and where isn't it happening? And lastly, speaking of regional, I'm from California, to the heart of the Bay Area, where I pull up to an intersection and literally every car at the stoplight is an EV or, and typically a Tesla. So what's happening in California? So California actually is still really strong. You look at Q3 sales, right? And it actually declined a little bit, about 3,000 units just on the BEV side. But look at it. Look how it's grown over the last year. And then, in fact, even though it declined slightly in Q3, it's up like 13,000 units from 2 quarters ago. Again, really strong quarter. So in the narrative that it's declining is false, right? It's incredible growth. The other thing to remember is that even though BEV sales declined slightly, the BEV sales share actually increased a 0.5 percentage point. Because guess what? ICE vehicle sales had a bigger decline. So who's having the demand problem? BEVs? Maybe it's actually ICE vehicles, at least in California. All right, enough of the data. Let's actually look at some trends that are actually going to impact this or are already impacting it in recent quarters. So as I mentioned, interest rates has not gotten enough attention in the media as one of the factors. It's not just affecting BEV sales, but car sales overall, right? If you want to go out and lease or purchase with an auto loan car right now, you're going to pay the highest interest rates in the last 20 years, right? And it's a double whammy for electric vehicles, right? Because they already tend to be $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 above like a comparable model, right? And so that when you add on sort of the additional, maybe $100 a month or $200 a month in payments, right? It has a higher level of impact on consumers' ability to afford those versus gas vehicles. So, and that just has not gotten enough attention in the press. And so one of the things that's obviously happened is price cuts, right? We've seen, Tesla's been leading this, right, with a lot of price cuts, and the other automakers have had to follow, and many of them it's very painful, right, because they're losing a lot of money on their EVs, so this only compounds it. But it's important to remember 2 things. Why is Tesla cutting prices? Well, one is they have this massive factory a few minutes from here and one in Fremont pumping out Model Ys and Model 3s, 2 factories for one market, right? They're producing so many, they actually have to match that with demand, right? And so because they're producing so many, obviously they might have to adjust the price. The other thing to remember is Chris Hardo from Consumer Reports posted something on LinkedIn a couple days ago that was really important. We seem to forget that all the automakers, including Tesla, dramatically increased the prices on EVs over the last 12, 18 months, right? The Model 3 today is actually only $500 above what it was in 2019. And so we seem to forget with all this narrative about, oh, we're cutting prices, is remember last year when you went to a dealer to get an EV and they said $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 dealer markup, right? Well, that's because they didn't have any to sell you. Now they do. Whoa. Probably my favorite chart that I want to share with you today is the other factor of impact on demand. So you look at, this is actually both BEVs and plug-in hybrids, the number of models, right? We've gone from 2 about 14 years ago to almost 100 today. We'll be at 100 in a couple of months. We've basically almost doubled since 2020. So what is the impact of this? So the positive impact, obviously, is that consumers have greater choice. But so our pizza pie, our EV pizza pie is growing, right, as far as sales, but it's being sliced up in greater number of slices. So a couple years ago, it was being sliced up into 50 slices, right, to the models. Now it's being sliced up in almost twice as many models. And so the implication is that a lot of the EV models are going to see flat or declining sales, not because there isn't interest and demand in them, is because for that same model, a couple years ago, maybe there was only 1 or 2 competitors. Now there's 5 or something. The Model S now has 9 competitors, where 3 or 4 years ago it had 0 competitors, right? So we sort of forget that, right? So we have to sort of pull back the tea leaves to truly understand what's going on. The other thing is, obviously, is we're seeing a bifurcation in the market among automakers, right? So we have several of them are coming out, right, amidst all this negative news of, actually, we've never seen greater demand for our EVs. Like Volvo, Rivian's increasing production, right? And others like the Hyundai Motor Group, Hyundai, Kia, Genesis and stuff, maybe saying sort of fluctuating sales, but it's like we're still all in, right? And Hyundai, this group, is actually the #2 seller of EVs in the US now after Tesla, and that's not gotten enough press as well. And then we have another group that's basically saying we're seeing softening demand, it's really hard to sell these and stuff. And the implication and the challenge here is, as more and more companies come into the market, Lucid gears up, and Rivian and Fisker and VinFast and a lot of the other, and Polestar, a lot of these other newcomers who don't have sort of these legacy challenges, they're all in, right? But many of the legacy companies that are pulling back, right, if they pull back too far, like the question is, in a couple of years, will they be able to sort of catch up while they've given away part of the market share to these other companies? And speaking of which, right, one of the things that's starting to get some attention is China, right? China basically has too many automakers and too many cars, and so now they're the largest exporter of cars in the world. They've surpassed Japan. They're exporting to every country. US is next, right? They're already here, right? Volvo and Polestar, Chinese owned with some models made in China, right? Perhaps one of the most exciting EVs to come out in the next few years is the Volvo EX30. It's gonna be about 35,000 if I remember right? One of the things that's a problem and a challenge for EV growth now, right, is affordability. All the automakers have focused on 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, $100,000 big SUVs, pickups, et cetera. Nobody's focused on the low end of the market. Sure, you got the Bolt and stuff like that, but there isn't a lot of choice. And in order to grow the market, we have to get that. Somebody's gonna take that market, right? And the Chinese are now setting up factories in Mexico, so they can basically just bring the cars over from Mexico to the US and get around some of the US, the North America buy requirements and that type of thing for the clean vehicle credit, et cetera. So they're not just coming, but they're here. And the last thing, obviously, is we've really screwed things up with charging in this country, right? Charging has gotten one of the biggest black eyes in the industry the last couple of years because it's been a race just to get the damn things in the ground. And oh, we forgot, we actually have to maintain them and make sure they work. Every day, this week already, there's been CNN and NPR stories about what horrible charging experiences reporters have had on road trips. It's constantly over there. Oh, but guess what? What is our solution to this? We're just gonna hand it over to Tesla. So every automaker now, except for about half a dozen major ones, have said we're gonna go to the NACS, Tesla standard. Our cars are gonna have access to the supercharger. So instead of fixing it, we're just gonna go to one company and let them solve it. Maybe that's the right answer, maybe it isn't. But we have to fix this, because this is one of the other, in addition to affordability, fixing sort of the charging experience, which we're gonna hear from Matt a little bit later. Now I'm gonna go in my sort of last session and close out with 8 things we need to stop doing, 8 things we need to start doing. One is, I know there are a lot of PHEV haters in the room. I'm actually a big fan of plug-in hybrids. 1 out of 100 cars on the road in the US today are electric, right? People aren't ready. The whole middle of the country isn't ready. Let's get them some trading pants. Let's get them into a plug-in hybrid where they can drive around town on fully electric juice, right? And when they go on that road trip or when they pull that trailer, right, they're good to go, right? So all right, woo, let's hear it for plug-in hybrids. And a call out to John Volker, who we'll hear from today. But he says, Loren, we gotta make sure people plug them in. So I got that in for you, John. We gotta make sure people plug them in. But fundamentally, let's stop making PHEVs the enemy. Secondly, let's stop comparing the charging experience to gas stations. It's different. Refueling an EV is different. We have to start explaining to buyers that you don't go to a centralized station most of the time. If you have a home, you drive to work or whatever, you come home, you plug in, you wake up in the morning with a fully charged EV. It's more like a smartphone than a gas car. And the industry just has not done a good enough job explaining that. And one of my biggest pet peeves, let's stop giving away fast free charging. That isn't why we buy an EV. We buy an EV because it's easy to just plug in and charge at home or where you live and work, right? The only time we need fast charging for most people is we go on road trips And most people only go on a couple road trips a year. Let's stop giving this away and instead focus on getting chargers in their homes, in their apartment, in their condos, on sidewalks where people live. And let's stop selling EVs as if they're just a new flip phone, a new cell phone. It's a new product. Let's start selling them as an iPhone, a smartphone, not just a new, improved, regular phone. Apple didn't sell the iPhone when it came out as it made better phone calls, right? It was a computer in your pocket. And so what I mean by that is let's stop selling the negative, right? Oh, you don't have to go to this gas station. People go to a gas station once or twice a month. It's 5 minutes, 10 minutes out of their time. Yeah, EV people, we love to say, never have to go to a gas station. But your average person, it's like their 401k is a problem, not going to the gas station once or twice a month, right? Let's actually start being smart and selling EVs about what they do better and different, what an ICE vehicle cannot do, right? They're a battery on wheels, right? And the industry has not adopted bidirectional charging, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. The first thing we have to tackle is vehicle to home, right? And the opportunity to tap into that battery for worksite and charging and tailgating and backing up your house when the power goes out, right? Like, this is the fundamental big difference, and we're just not taking advantage of it.
Did you know that Norway sells way more electric cars per capita than the US? Norway.
Well, I won't stand for it.
Stop doing that, please, automakers. I loved this commercial when it came out of the Super Bowl a couple years ago, but it was an utter failure. It didn't educate 40 million people or 100, however many people watched the Super Bowl about charging and what's different about EVs, and it didn't help sell them, right? It was fun, it was entertaining, but it actually didn't achieve anything. So start doing more of this.
There's so many cars out here to test drive.
And ride another one, and then ride another one, and ride another one. There's no limit.
It's an opportunity of a lifetime.
So there's a saying in the industry we all know and love, which is it's about getting butts in seats. And fundamentally, kudos to BJ and Electrify Expo, and it's why we're here today, is to get those butts in the seats. We've got to get people over their fear of EVs as this thing that only weirdos in California drive, right? We've got to get people to experience that power. They're fun. They're better than a gas car. Like, you want one of these things. Go out and drive it and experience. Most people have never been in an EV, so all they do is they read Fox News or whatever it is, and they hear all this fear. Like, but once somebody gets behind the wheel, they're like, holy shit, this is amazing, right? But then we have to educate them on the difference in refueling, because fundamentally the charging experience is where we're failing and where we haven't actually educated, because that's really the difference between the cars. And we're going to hear more about that from Matt and John and Austin Energy a little bit later. The other thing is again, if you go back to that map I showed, high demand for EVs in California, Oregon, Washington, New York, Maryland, et cetera, right? It's not a national audience. Let's stop doing these big, stupid, glorified ads on national TV, et cetera, and do targeted marketing, right? People go here, right? They raise their hand. They say, I'm interested in EV. Then let's use digital and targeted marketing afterwards. People that raise their hand. Tesla, remember the old saying? Tesla fans, boys and girls love to say that Tesla didn't have to advertise, doesn't advertise. Well, guess what? Now they're advertising on Google AdWords, right? Everybody should be doing this because people are searching. That's how they look for cars, right? They search. This is where we should be spending our money, being targeted marketing. Lastly, as I mentioned, right, BEV only is not going to solve our problem. We have to stop as an industry just selling BEVs, and we have to have a total multimodal solution. We have to sell BEVs, plug-in hybrids, even, dare I say it, regular hybrids. Anything that gets those people out of regular gas and reducing carbon emissions. Walking, biking, outside, let's take advantage of those e-bikes and scooters, public transit, et cetera. Again, folks, today about 1 out of 100 vehicles in America on the road are electric. My forecast is 2030, 11 out of them. That means that about 90% of the vehicles, 275 million gas-powered vehicles, will still be on the road. All of this effort that we're doing, this great effort doing, is only going to scratch a tiny little bit of reducing the emissions, right? So folks, we need to think differently. Yes, we're all in on BEVs and the transition and stuff, but we have to think well beyond that. So folks, this is our moonshot. Let's make it happen. Thank you.